Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. It is me once again, screaming into the void of the internet. Just got off work, called my ride, and funnily enough, one tried to have me pay essentially like freaking $40. $40 on what is usually a $10 ride. So I was like, yeah, F no. Because I always compare the prices and try and save up as much as I can. But, yeah, that was retarded. So I am going to be sitting here for like 20 to 30 minutes waiting on a ride, even though that ride was still $11, so I ain't gonna complain. So I just figured, what the hey, let's see what we got to talk about today, even though it's, I guess, tonight. Although you could consider it today, considering that it is, objectively speaking, a new day. So, I have been doing a little bit of thinking about something, folks. I've been doing a little bit of thinking about something. I've been thinking about how a lot of channels have been talking about this, and I kind of want to give my thoughts on the matter. The American dream, right? I want to talk about the American dream, and I kind of want to talk about something in relation to that with my life. The American dream. Is it dead? Is it possible to succeed in America and stuff like that? Is there hope in America? Blah, 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 right? So to me, is the American dream dead? I think for all intents and purposes, it is quite easy to just hit the nail in the coffin and say yes. Yes, for the most part, the American dream is dead. Most people, unless there are massive changes made to how we are doing things, are not going to be able to get what they consider the dream. But you also have to acknowledge that the dream has changed, Once upon a time, the dream was white picket fence, family, 2 kids, blah, 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 right? But now, even that dream, let's just say securing a mate, right, is vastly more complicated now. Because everyone's standards have gone through the freaking roof. Everyone's thinking that they deserve the absolute best that they can get. Now, I'm not going to say that there aren't people who are just, like, getting together. Because, listen, let me just say this. Like I've always said, like, I think in the doomer space, they get too attached to the looks. I'm not going to say that they don't matter. They do. They obviously do. But they get so attached to them that they start to make it seem like there aren't, for lack of better words, unpleasant to look at people that get together and stay together, Let's just be real. There are plenty of unpleasant to look at people, shall we say, that still pop out babies, But nevertheless, that doesn't change the fact that even then, let's say that you do secure a mate, you have an entire industry milking money off of destroyed families, divorce court, child extortion, alimony, all of this crap, right? There is a lot that is stopping the supposed dream. The price for a house, right, has gone up exponentially. And the average house that you're looking at, 600 plus K. Inflated property taxes. Ask me how I know. I lost 2 homes recently. They weren't my homes, like, I was my name on it or something like that, but it was where we stayed. 2 homes lost. Because property taxes, and you've got tax liens. There's a whole bunch of shady stuff that goes on into, like, freaking real estate. So, you spend all your years, 30 years, 40 years paying off something that you don't have. It's not really yours, Because why do you have to pay it off? In the good old government, when they have it, they don't got to do nothing. They don't maintain the property. They don't repair the home. It's only when, like, some cocksucker in real estate gets a hold of it and then flips it and then sells it at the highest price that they can get, while trying to make sure that it just looks presentable, but there's still tons of crap wrong with it, right? So think about it. The American dream, good amount of money. Well, wages are stagnant, Heck, I'm getting paid a pretty okay amount of money, especially for a starter position. But there's no denying that, like, with the way that things are, like, if I was not doing what I am doing now, rooming with people, most of the money that I make in a month will go straight to the rent. Compared to one paycheck going to basically rent, and I still have, like, I want to say like maybe 20% of the paycheck left over after I pay rent. Pretty much 80 to 90% of the paycheck, both of my paychecks for a month, considering that I get paid bi-weekly, right, would go to rent. I wouldn't have anything left over. So, looking at this, from my own perspective, it's impossible for me to see any kind of instance where I could say that the American dream is alive and well. It's dead. And if it's not dead for some, it's dead for most. And if a lot of people are trying to fight to preserve it, it is a losing battle, But I kind of want to talk about this, and I kind of want to talk about hope and my thoughts on the matter. So, when people hear stuff like this, they like to say doom and gloom, It's just doom porn. You're an alarmist, blah, 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 right? But I'm going to tell you something unpopular that I have learned for myself. God dang, this freaking crap. Put my arm into something sticky. Pause. Not like that, you sick bastards, but this freaking table. Here's something that I've learned, guys. I think that there is power in saying something that's very unpopular to say, and I'm going to say it right now. Once you understand that no one is coming to save you, it puts you in a mindset of do or die. And I accepted, guys. I had to accept, with all the stuff that's going on, if you've been here a while, that no one was coming to save me. That no matter how much I was trying and stuff like that, I had to try even more, because there was no way that I was ever going to be able to change my situation if I just sat there and did nothing. And I think if a lot of us would stop pretending, like imagine if this whole country started thinking like that, right? I live in America, so I'm thinking about America, okay? Imagine if this whole freaking country stopped believing that you could vote somebody who's going to fix this problems. Stop believing that you could convince these freaking cocksuckers to, not do stuff that's going to upset other countries and risk putting us into war. Imagine if we just all accepted that no, nobody's going to come and do anything, and we just have to take care of ourselves. What the hell could this government do if everyone had that mindset? What the hell could they do? Nothing. They could do absolutely nothing. And I think that there is, again, power in admitting that, because you acknowledge it for what it is. And you guys know what I talk about when I'm always talking about looking at the world for what it is rather than what you want it to be. Admitting that there's no one who's going to come save you and that you have to take action is something incredibly hard to do. And I understand that it kind of destroys you after a while, because you grow up looking at all this fiction, you grow up seeing all these different characters and these people that you idolize, but you got to realize the reason we're so enthralled with it is because we know that doesn't exist, dude. We know it doesn't exist. And so we like to create worlds where there's so many heroes, there's so many people willing to take action and do stuff, and the real world is not like that. If there is no inherent benefit for the self, okay, then people aren't going to do anything. If someone does not see any kind of reward for taking action, a lot of times, especially if it comes at a sacrifice, they don't want to do anything. They'd rather just try and be comfortable. And unfortunately, again, like I've shared kind of in the previous video about Japan, and I've talked about the human spirit, we've been pretty whipped. Like I said, I think if you could see the souls of people, you wouldn't see a spot on them that wouldn't be covered in some kind of scar from being whipped by this world. But in spite of it, in spite of the scars, I think that you have to accept that you got to be your own hero and you got to be your own protagonist. And a lot of people, try and say that, well, I'm not the protagonist. I'm not, the hero and stuff like that. And that's fine. I'm not saying you got to be a hero for everyone. I'm saying you got to be your own protagonist, if you will. And you might feel like you aren't. But listen, the fact of the matter is, that's going to keep you in a position where you're never really going to be. Because listen, you're already starting by telling yourself that you can't. Listen, one of the worst things you can tell yourself, and this is not some freaking guru, buy my course bullcrap, okay? This is just the truth. The worst thing that you can tell yourself is that you can't. Your brain will literally start just convincing your body that you can't do something. I'm telling you you can't. If you really just say, I can't, trust me, you'll never even want to attempt. I'm not going to say that you should always tell yourself that you can. You have to be reasonable sometimes. But you can at least say that I can try. I can try, And what I realized with all these months that I've spent fighting, and I finally have my place, guys. I finally have, it may not be much to other people. Maybe they're laughing and ridiculing me right now. Who knows, right? But I have peace. Is everything perfectly hunky-dory? Not necessarily. There isn't necessarily problems at the house or anything, but, job issues and stuff like that. The job's not easy. Wear and tear on the body. Not everything's, perfect and hunky-dory. Not by a long shot. But at the end of the day, I accepted that I had to make a change and that I had to get into a position where I could be comfortable with who I am, and comfortable in the fact that the life that I was drowning in, essentially, being miserable all the time, has finally gone away because I took action, And like I said, I'm not going to pretend like I don't understand why people don't take action, but you have to understand that there is a consequence for that. I'm not shaming you. I'm never going to say that I don't blame you, for what you're dealing with. I'm not going to ever tell you that I'm against you guys. I'm never going to be one of these people saying, oh, you freaking losers, you arseholes, you're just weak. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say that. But you also have to acknowledge that if you're going to choose to live like that, there is a consequence. There is a price to pay. By me taking action, there's a price to pay. My legs are freaking killing me. My feet are killing me. I didn't get much sleep and I had to work 10 hours. And unfortunately, where I usually will have like the next day off, I work again because someone decided to quit. So, there are consequences even when you try. But at the end of the day, the point of life, in my opinion, I shouldn't say the point of life. I'm not saying the meaning of life, but one of the things about life, I should say, is that you have the ability to choose. Sometimes choices are kind of like, forced on us, and it doesn't really feel like you have much of a choice, but you have the ability to choose, Whoa, jeez, I thought that was a freaking cockroach, I'm not gonna lie. It wasn't, it was just a small bug, but, man, sometimes these bastards are flying out here. So, jeez, okay. But I have chosen, I personally have chosen that I'm going to try. I'm going to be the protagonist of my life. Every decision that I'm going to make is going to be with me at the center. It's going to be with me as the herald of change in my life. That's how I feel. If it's something small, if it's something vast, I will always say, hey, listen, what position does that put me in? Period, point blank. And if somebody doesn't like that, tough. It's my life. Because the truth of the matter is, when you accept that you have to be your own hero, you got to acknowledge something that nobody really cares, And even if they do care, can they really do anything to change your position, Because if they can't, all right, like you have kind words for me and stuff, but you can't do anything to change, so. What really are the words? I mean, the words are powerful. I shouldn't say that, encouragement can go a long way, so I shouldn't say that altogether, but it's very hard to be encouraged in incredibly low pits of your life, It's very hard to be encouraged when you are in a mud pit and you're trying to climb up and you just keep falling, and technically speaking, I was in a mud pit, Now, I've pretty much, begun to climb. I wouldn't say I'm out of it, not by a long shot, but I've begun to climb. And I've got some nice footholds, And I'm sure that there are plenty of people who have been in my position, and they've got footholds, and maybe they fell again, and they got footholds and fell again, and they just decided, I'm just standing right here in the pit. But I have decided that I'm going to do everything in my power to continue to climb out this butthole. I hope to God that I will have a point in my life that I'm comfortable, that there is no chaos around me, there's no calamity around me. And it feels like that now. It does feel like that, but you never know. I feel like you'll only ever really be in that position when it's like, that even if something crazy happened, you're fine, And I'm far from that position, Perhaps one day, though. But, yeah, I think I'm going to, kind of conclude with this. Despite the fact that the American dream is dead, despite the fact that I personally feel like being hopeful is kind of a fool's errand about stuff like that, I do feel personally like you should just accept that you kind of have to be the hero of your own story, Or if you don't want to be the hero, whatever, be the villain or whatever. But just be the protagonist of your story. Don't be a side character in your life. Don't try and let the struggles that you're dealing with convince you that you shouldn't even attempt to make any choice, And even if you make a choice and it's not the best choice, try and learn from it and move forward, But at the end of the day, it's up to you. I can't make anyone do anything, It's rather interesting because my coworker, who's younger than me, even though, like, he's taller and stuff like that, he doesn't, like, look to me for advice, but he kind of, like, he enjoys talking to me because I speak from a very realistic perspective, and I give him insight on things that I feel that not a lot of people want to give him insight on, When he talks about, like, money and stuff like that, I give him insight on that. When he talks about, like, looking to date and stuff like that, I give him insight on that as well, He's at least pretty sharp, and that's good. But I'm not saying that, like, I'm some wise guy. I think that all of us kind of need other people sometimes to kind of give their perspective. And the most powerful perspective that you can give is offering advice, but always telling people that your life is your own. You should be making the decisions for yourself. So I want to thank you guys for watching, as per usual. And again, like, despite how it may feel, guys, despite how hopeless, I guess, the situation can feel, that doesn't mean that you can't get something done. Because for me, I've kind of started moving forward with this attitude that get it done or get out of my way, And that may sound rude at first, but you have to accept that there are people that just will look at something and they just won't do anything. They won't do anything and they won't change their situation. So if you want to change the situation, you got to get it done. Or sometimes you got to just get out the way so someone else can get it done. But usually when someone else gets it done, they're making sure that, it's done in a way that's going to benefit them, not you. So, kind of is what it is with that, guys. But again, as per usual, thank you guys for watching, as always. Thank you for giving me strength, boys. And again, there is life beyond your pain. Can't tell you when times are going to get better, but if you stick around through the bad times, then you can enjoy the good ones, Thank you again. God bless. I'll see you next time.